Okay, so
cozy. Look at this.
I know this is great.
It's a homey thing.
You never know. The thing that I love about the LightSource office is when people come here, 50% of the time they just think it's my house. They don't know that this is like actually an office. But we're calling in live from beautiful, sunny San Francisco. Today I'm with my dear friend, our first exec and only exec hire to date, our Chief Solutions Officer, the venerable Pieter Riedstra. So we don't have a hard agenda for this first podcast. We're just testing out the audio and talking to our fans.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, maybe we can start with a question. So just for those who don't know, Pieter was back in the year 1999 an early employee of a company called Free Markets, which was the inventor of the internet auction. Fast forward past the .com bubble, and then 20 years beyond that, today we don't see a lot of e-auctions happening. And so my question is, why has e-auction gone the way of the dinosaur? What are the weaknesses of e-auction versus an RFQ process? Do you think there's a place for e-auction in 2024 and beyond? And if so, in all circumstances or in some subset, and where?
Yeah, interesting question.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think that in 1999, e-auctions were very popular and very successful, frankly. So I don't know whether you know that, but at Free Markets, we had auctions in an auction room. So we had our clients come to the offices. We had an office in Brussels, and there was a sort of atrium-like room where the clients would sit and they would watch the auction live.
Yeah.
It was very exciting and
sort of like Cape Canaveral with like
Cape
Apollo
Canaveral
14,
kind of thing. Yeah.
Countdown.
And what happens was that you could bring the world, different continents, different suppliers, different capabilities, together in one place and say, this is the bid package and the spec sheets, and tell us what you can do with price. Very focused on price.
And what were the categories here? Are we talking about like commodities like chemicals? Are we talking about services? What were the, if you can remember, like what were a few things that were like really crushing it at auction at that time? Interesting.
So we literally did everything. We did direct materials, we did indirect materials. We tried full commodity markets. I tried steel at a certain moment. I was warned this is not going to work, and I think the experts were right at the time. But the idea was to bring different suppliers together, have an event where you can create competitive pressure, put pressure on incumbent suppliers, and then have an outcome. And it was very successful. I think in order to answer your question, over time, people have learned and discovered that in an auction setting, there's a risk that suppliers overextend themselves, and driven by the fear of losing business or the eagerness to win business, overpromise or submit prices that they cannot honor later on. So relatively quickly, there was this thing like, yes, you can run an auction, but can you also implement? And I think that has over time deteriorated the value of the auction.
Right. That's a really good point. So people will win the auction on price because you have to have price be like a big factor to compete the number down.
Yeah.
So what would happen in the case where a supplier wins the auction and then upon review, they don't meet the qualifications? Are people going back with their tail between their legs to the second highest bidder, or are they pre-qualifying them, or do they have to do like 10 times the work of an RFQ and pre-qualify everyone before they even begin the event? I guess, how do you unwind that issue?
Yeah, I think at the time what they tried to do was come up with models to explain the relative position of the bid. It was not only price, but there were also other factors factored in. You knew the supplier, whether you pre-qualified, et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, if you would, the auction is very much associated with lowest bidder wins.
Okay.
Lowest bidder wins, and otherwise, why would you do
auction?
And people have played with that model, and there were slow auctions and pre-qualification first. I'm not saying that an auction can't work.
Sure.
Right? But I'm not sure it's the preferred model of a lot of buyers or a lot of CPOs at this moment. I think doing a professional RFQ, which is difficult enough, as you know.
Yeah, sure.
With relevant bid feedback, and with the time for suppliers to respond, not in a compressed time frame, but in over time. It's a more effective model to identify market pricing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about building some kind of like? Because I see the Achilles heel of auctions, right? Like you get the lowest cost supplier. The lowest price supplier may also very likely be the lowest service and lowest quality supplier, right? What about like things like balanced scorecards? Is that like a more of a theory? Does that work well in theory, but very hard in practice, where you're giving people an auction, but it's not just price, it's like price plus quality plus financial, how ironclad is your balance sheet? Have you seen those kinds of balanced scorecards working in an auction setting, or does that calculus?
Absolutely. There are settings even in auction software nowadays. You can say the relative position of somebody in this auction is influenced by my perception of your ability to serve me. So they will give you a discount or an adder or whatever.
Sure.
So absolutely. So people make use of that.
And does that work well, or does that not work well? Does that solve some of the issues, or? or why not?
Well, it's a little bit what you said. There are not that many companies that do auctions. We at McKinsey, I was with McKinsey, I don't know whether people know that, but I have in the 10 years that I was there, I haven't done that many auctions unless it was for a transformation program where the company needed money and they said, we don't care, we're just running an auction and see what happens. And then that could be an outcome. What I think is important for maybe the audience to know is that 70% of business in any negotiation goes to an incumbent.
Okay.
Which is very interesting.
Okay.
It always goes to an incumbent.
And why is that? Why is it that 70? I mean, I think I have an idea, but why is it that 70% of the business goes back to the incumbent versus?
I think what this incumbent provides in terms of impact under competitive pressure is often good enough for people to make the decision. If you take things like switching costs, supplier risk, relationships, etc., etc.
Okay.
But it's a high number. It's
okay. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of also the devil you know versus the devil you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
So okay, here's a bit of a controversial question I'll ask. So we had a customer earlier today asking about e-auctions, and I think you know which one it was. It was the one very early this morning.
Yeah.
And they asked about if they did e-auctions, could they have e-auctions with only one bidder, and then the rest are faked? Yeah. So what do you think about? Here's a question. What do you think about the idea of an e-auction where it's only one supplier, maybe even just the incumbent, and they're competing against fake challengers? Has that something you've seen? Is it something that has worked? Is it something that's ethical? I mean, I think it's
highly unethical. And I think that any supplier who would find out that happened to him will have an opinion about wanting to serve that client. I hate lying.
Yeah.
And I think that when these things come out, is it worth having to defend yourself when you did this? I would never want to work or collaborate with a client that would do something to me. So my advice is don't do it. I think it's unfair.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, where is the line for the poker face, I guess?
The line for the poker face is everywhere. I mean, negotiation is negotiation. Do whatever you want, but the deliberately cheating is just not right. And everybody's free to do what he or she wants to do. And maybe you'll be clever and you put your single supplier under pressure. I think that creating a good process where you bring a fair competition together and there's enough opportunity to negotiate impact if you create honest competitive pressure with companies that can compete. They're eager to win the business, etc.
Okay, that's fair. That makes a lot of sense. All right, Peter. I think this has been an interesting little snippet.
You asked me another question, which maybe
sure,
you might find interesting. So I joined LightSource in February of 2022, and when we started, one of the things that I realized was that the products that I was trying to help create and build and bring to clients had sort of similar features or capabilities as a product called Quick Source from Free Market. Literally 20 years ago.
Did we clear this with our counsel first?
I don't know if we did. But what I concluded is that over the last 2 decades, there has been relatively little innovation or real product development, which is the reason why we know nowadays that most buyers still use email, etc.
Right.
And as you and I figured out at a certain moment in terms of who is our competition. And I think that we have a tremendous opportunity now in 2023 because there are new technologies that can help to truly drive automation and content development in our space. So today we very much have a process enablement tool, but you still need to do something with the technology in order to bring the value of the technology to life. So if we, for example, create an RFQ, it's important to populate that RFQ with good data about what is that we're looking to bid out, who are the right suppliers for this, how do we analyze these bids. But with new technology, in particular AI technology, LLM, I think we have a tremendous opportunity to automate a lot of these things and make use of the tool much easier for buyers. I think that's an exciting thing of our time.
I completely agree. It's so same problem statement, same zip code for the solution, but with like a whole new technology landscape. Maybe it's possible to bridge that gap between Excel and email and the non-use of tools and what every other business function has been doing now for decades, which is using sort of best of class software as their sort of go-to operating system. Not to toot our own horn, but that's obviously our bias. So Mr. Lopez, his car exploded. Did it explode for like a James Bond film?
No. It's a very tragic story. It's really a very tragic story. The story is that this guy, who was an extreme innovator in procurement. He worked with a consulting company. He adopted a process which was new at that time. It's a 7-step sourcing process.
7 steps.
7-step sourcing process.
Is that like the 7 secret spices of KFC?
No, I think that's A.T. Kearney developed this.
Okay.
And it's procurement 101, understanding your supply base, understanding your requirements, deciding on a strategy, etc. But he applied that for direct materials in a car, and he was very successful. He has, I think, learned a trick at GM and then moved to Volkswagen. But over the years, the rumor was that the quality of Volkswagen deteriorated, and they blamed procurement to some extent. That we're creating pressure on suppliers to be to still make money, but at the same time, also supply something that still works.
Yeah.
And as a result, the quality of the brand, or the quality, the manufacturing quality, deteriorated, and procurement was to blame. And I think that he ran a lot of auctions. And I'm not saying that there was a direct correlation between auctions and the deteriorating quality, but if you push hard enough all the time, then you can squeeze only this much, and you'll impact your specifications, you'll impact so that happened.
It is interesting because we would often have the situation where when things were too good to be true, they actually were.
Yeah.
And so when a supplier would quote us a price and they'd say, okay, we're going to win this business, and they'd be way under like the other three, it wasn't a green flag, it was a red flag. Because what they would hope, and what came to pass very often, is that they would start with this low price and then pray that we would make these design changes. And then every time they made a design change, they would just increase the price. And there's you've seen that meme, right? The one that's like it's like the yacht.
The two boats.
The two boats. Yeah. So can you put that on screen? Yeah, that's exactly what I like. That's what I'm talking about. So the yacht says, the dinghy says original contract, and the yacht says change order.
Change order.
And so the supplier who wins once they're no longer in competitive pressure. This is just the most classic game in the procurement book, is just increase the margin through the changes. So something you have to avoid. And I think it can also be solved very much by having more detailed bid sheets, because then you can track the changes over time and you can see, hey, like this is, maybe it's not fully a perfect power dynamic, but at least, you can sort of have a cards on the table question, like, okay, well, what within the quote changed?
Can you imagine what would happen if we could automate that analysis? So if you see a quote, which clearly has to be an outlier or something that could be, and then have some sort of automation interpret that and say, well, this likely is incorrect, or this could, or this supplier probably made a mistake here. You should ask him whether he means this or means that.
Ding, ding.
Yeah.
Great idea, Peter. If only that could be in our product.
Ooh.
Yes. So, Peter, thanks for being in the office as normal and sitting down on these chairs that are slightly reoriented to talk about
with a cat. Even
the cat. There you go.
I'm a big cat fan, so I'm very happy with this.
There you go.
Little cushion. Yep.
This one's a little lower maintenance, I think. Though you don't have to.
It doesn't shed.
It doesn't. Well, actually, I don't know. These pillows are not that fancy. I don't even want to tell you where I got them, so they might shed a little bit. But
I just discovered it was a cat I was holding here.
Yeah. And what's on the other side? It's like a Matisse.
This one looks more scary. Is the cat? Could be a cat. Look at this one here. Yeah, could be a cat. Eyes here.
Giraffe.
Eyes here. Nose. Yeah. Nice ones.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Peter. This has been fun.
Yeah.